Hey there, YouTube. Mtnboy here. Today I just wanted to take you on one of my favorite hikes. This is the Catherine Creek Recreational Area located in southern Washington on the Columbia River. And it is about 71 miles from Portland, so about an hour and a half up I-84. And this is really a really neat area. Not only does it have just tremendous views and great hiking, but it's a great year-round location. This is taken in late December of 2022, but this is a great hike year-round. You'll see all sorts of wildflowers that come out starting in early spring, and you'll have kind of various different blooms that'll occur throughout the spring. Here's the loop we'll be taking today. There's a map at the trailhead. It's probably about 4 miles. We do a little bit kind of different variation of it. And, one of the things that's kind of interesting to note about the landscape is since it's located on the east side of the Cascades, it's quite a bit drier. So you're kind of in that Mediterranean chaparral ecosystem that's predominated by ponderosa pine and transitions into Oregon white oak, which is really kind of a neat environment. You also kind of note how you can see just a lot of exposed rock and basalt. That's because the geology of this area is really fantastic. Not only do you have the series of Columbia flood basalts, which many geologists kind of think are originated by a asteroid strike on the Earth that caused a large upwelling of basalt that kind of layered over the entire area. But then later on, about 12 to 13,000 years ago, you had a series of almost biblical floods called the Missoula floods that washed down this valley and essentially scoured out a lot of the topsoil and left all sorts of really interesting erratic depositions and deposits in its wake. I'd kind of really encourage you to kind of take a look more into it. It's a really neat story. But anyway, on with the hike. So right off the bat, you get this kind of great bridge crossing. In the summertime, often this will be almost dry, just a bare trickle. But here in the winter, and this is just after kind of a series of snowstorms and ice storms, and so everything's pretty wet and everything's melting off. There's kind of an interesting kind of bluish tint to the water. I think there's a little bit of sediment in there, but you can kind of see how there's just kind of like little waterfalls that kind of appear all over the place, again, because there's just not a whole lot of soil or organic material to kind of soak up the water. It was a little bit soggy this day. I mean, obviously you can see the trail is fairly wet, and kind of later on you'll kind of see it gets a little bit boggy. But this is actually a fairly decent place since there's not a whole lot of soil. It's fairly rocky, and so it's in very good shape kind of relative to other areas. Joining me today is my sweet wife and our dog Ollie, and a visiting dog Bentley, who now Bentley's 15, so he gets the privilege of being kind of carried everywhere. And but this whole hike, it was really amazing to kind of watch how alert and oriented he was, just kind of watching everything kind of going on around him. And even at one point, as you'll see later, he got out of the pack and decided to kind of play with the big dogs. So you can see here again, there's kind of ponderosa pine in the background there. This whole area was used as ranch land for probably the last 100 or more years, and so that's really kind of kept down a lot of tree species. And so it'll be interesting, since this area has been taken over by the Forest Service and has kind of been put into recreational use. It'll be really interesting to see how does it change in its character, over the next number of years, as you don't have livestock kind of progressively grazing on the area. In the spring, this is, again, I kind of mentioned before, the wildflowers here are amazing. Oftentimes you'll see a lot of balsam root, followed by alpine lupin, Indian paintbrush, kind of successive waves of different colors that kind of come through the area. As we're kind of walking through this former ranch, you're seeing a lot of the old ranch roads, and later you'll see some of the infrastructure. I believe there's like an old cabin, and there's the corrals. Because there's a lot of water right now, you're seeing kind of like these just charming little waterfalls kind of popping up all over the place, and the whole kind of land comes alive. Usually during the summers, this is all dry, so all of these creeks are little intermittent streams that you see. We're getting up a little bit higher. I think we're maybe up about 500 feet above where the trailhead is, and we'll kind of crest the hill up here. And one of the things that's kind of neat about this area, although yes, there is kind of the designated loop, there's just trails that kind of go off forever. And that's what's kind of neat, is to kind of go explore. On a typical weekend day, although this area isn't as busy as some of the more popular hikes in the area, such as Syncline, there'll be a fair number of people on the parking lot. But all you have to do is just kind of get off that main loop, and you typically will find a place kind of off on your own. This represents the high point of our hike, so it's time to have a little snack and just kind of take in the view for a little bit. And now it's time for the descent. As you can see, the fog kind of rolled in just a little bit, so it's kind of a neat descent into kind of into the spooky murk, as you can see. Typically from this area, you'll kind of look up and you'll see Mount Hood kind of hanging up over the whole landscape. Now, this whole area that you can see does comprise the Catherine Creek area, and it actually connects over via trails over the ridge you can see in front of you over to the Syncline area. So you can realistically, you can hike 50 miles or more on trails if you really wanted to. Here's Bentley. He's up kind of running around, kind of enjoying himself. Although I have to admit, he didn't go too far, and he was ready to kind of get back into the backpack. So you got to cheer on a 15-year-old guy who is still out there kind of doing it. Well, now we're heading back down. This is the one of the ranch roads that serves the area, and you can see here kind of this stand of ponderosa pine with this kind of lovely green moss on it. There's some old kind of barbed wire that kind of signifies the entrance into where the old corrals and short-term cabin that the ranch hands might have stayed in while they're up kind of working the ranch. It's really neat that they've left everything intact. You see like little details in this that's really kind of neat to see. I believe that's the old ranch hand cabin, and there's the corrals where when they're kind of ready to transport the cattle, they bring it down. Overhanging the whole thing is this beautiful natural hanging arch. You can kind of see a little light through there, and there is a trail that kind of runs up behind it, so you can kind of get a view of it from the top. But I just imagine what it must have been like kind of working and living here and being able to see this every day. I'm glad that it's available for everybody to enjoy. Here's the old corral. This kind of stood up. You can see these old hinges that were obviously made in an old blacksmith shop, I don't know, maybe 50 or 100 years ago. And you can kind of get an idea of the layout. These areas would have probably had a few hundred head of cattle, which then would have been collected and in the old days kind of driven down to the river and either picked up by boat or maybe be driven down the road to Bingen, where they would have been put on a ship headed to Portland. So Ollie's pretty excited to be out here, as you can see, and just enjoying the area. This is Catherine Creek again. We've crossed it, and this is the second time. Here it's a little wider, a little shallower, and in the summer times this is pretty much dry. You can just walk right across there. But for the alternative time, you have somebody thoughtfully kind of put in a little bit of bridge to it. Maybe I'll be quiet here and I'll turn the sound up so you can kind of hear just the sound of the water and the bridge. And again, you can kind of see that bluish hue, probably just a little bit of sediment that kind of comes into the water. This is all kind of recent snow melt. Now as we kind of get closer, they've done a good job and kind of graveled the main road. You'll typically see more people here, so we'll put Ollie back on the leash, and he kind of runs into a few friends here and there. Well, we got to the trailhead. One thing that's kind of neat about the area is across the way is a paved series of loops. That's really great if for those who are not as adventurous and not really able to go as far off road. Anyway, I just want to thank you and have a great day. If you enjoy this, like and share.